Hey there, I'm Greg Nicotero.
Hi, my name is Coleman Domingo.
Hi, I'm Benai Garcia.
Hi, I am Mo Collins.
Hi, I'm Chad L. Coleman, Tyrese from The Walking Dead, and Cuddy from The Wire, and you are listening to the Cinik Radio Podcast. Here are your hosts, Cinik, Igrihe, and Ryan.
And you are listening to yet another edition of the Cinik Radio Podcast. And I'm your host in the Bird Box Challenge of Podcasting, Cinik. Joining me, as always, your friends and mine, Igrihe and Ryan. And on this week's show, we review DC's latest offering in Aquaman. We also do the latest in geek news for you, and even talk about the government shutdown, because we are the Cinik Radio Podcast. Like, listen, subscribe, but most importantly, don't try this at home. The often imitated and sometimes openly mocked, but never duplicated Aquaman has gotten its very own solo origin film. So bring in a healthy helping of Jason Momoa, try saying healthy helping a couple times fast, from Conan the Barbarian and Game of Thrones fame, and some impressive visual effects, including some new interesting bad guys like the Black Manta. Ryan, can this film shake the stigma around the Superman of the sea?
Yeah, I think so. I think, obviously through different iterations, he's been more or less of a joke. I'm not the biggest fan of the character, but so I think if you're not a big fan, you kind of are stuck with him being kind of more of a joke. But I think with any hero, the right writer and the right story and the right actor, if it's on the screen, can make a character interesting. So yeah, I didn't ever worry that the stigma would be broken. I just was concerned with how they were going to go about it, and I think it's better than the Justice League movie kind of led me to think they would go with the character. So overall, I think they did a good job of kind of removing the stigma.
What do you think, IG? I mean, did they shake the stigma that included just outright beatings on Family Guy and a little healthy poking of the fun on Entourage?
You know, what I think they did was they took Aquaman in a direction that nobody expected to see coming. I don't know. It's really kind of a weak character to begin with. He just does not have that much going for him. Okay, he can swim underwater, can breathe underwater, kind of king of the sea, can talk to fish, I guess. But, really, he can't shoot I-beams. He's not rich. He's not an Amazon princess. There's a lot to be said for what little they had to work with going into this. And I think that being said, they did okay, but I think they were leaning a little too hard in other directions.
Well, they did enhance his powers. I mean, he can swim super fast. He did seem like he was rather strong. They did a lot. What they did basically was more they upped the cool factor. I mean, casting Jason Momoa, you can't get a cooler dude than that. I mean, if there's anybody that everybody would love to hang out with, it's the dude from Game of Thrones with all the tats and the wild hair. That was the first step in a good direction right there. I loved the villains in this movie. I thought they were fun and interesting, and they made them two really distinctly different characters, which I liked. They both kind of had different objectives. Ryan, we saw this before in Splash. Boy meets beautiful girl and is instantly smitten. Boy finds out not only is she the queen, but she's from the sea. And it's very much the same in Aquaman. But based off of how polluted the ocean is, Ryan, would you consider this risky romance?
I'm not sure to answer the question.
That's a new and special kind of HIV right there. That's for sure. There's some kind of weird thing that is going to be infused with motor oil and other things that is really going to be hard to treat with today's modern medicine.
Yeah, I don't know if there's penicillin. Well, there's plenty of penicillin in the ocean, but I don't know if there's enough penicillin for what she may have by swimming around in there. I don't care how beautiful the siren song is. I'm not pointing my boat towards the direction of the rocks, although Nicole Kidman is beautiful. Ryan, what do you do in the same situation? You find a girl on the beach. Do you take her home and try to nurse her back to health?
I mean, I guess so. It's funny because watching it, it's like he hit the jackpot. I guess because it's like he's this kind of not a recluse, but he clearly kind of lives a fairly isolated life. He doesn't have many options, and then that pops up. So that's got to be an interesting situation, and it couldn't help but get the feeling of like it's a little creepy. Like, what do you do in that situation? And luckily she's basically a god, so not like he was going to do much harm to her, but it's still kind of a messy situation to find yourself in.
IG, kind of the same question. Does this automatically throw distrust on any girl that you meet at the beach? There's a chance that she may be a mermaid, or that there's some ocean men going to kick your walls in and try to take her back to Atlantis?
Yeah, that's going to be a no for me. Just finding some random unconscious girl in today's world and trying to take her to my house means I'm going to be on Fox News next week, and I don't want any part of that. I can see why he did it, and maybe if I lived in Alaska or one of these places where like I'm one person for every 50 square miles, maybe you can get away with taking random women into your house. But yeah, it seems like a bad message to send in today's world that, hey, if you find someone unconscious laying around on a rock, you should take her to your house and try and help her out.
Yeah, in the world of Me Too, I don't know how much mouth-to-mouth I'll be giving anybody in the distant future. I'll dial 911, I'll wish them well, and I'm not up for any risky romance there. Although I did like the fact that they cast the same actor from Aquaman's father is naturally cooler, that he's Django Fett, right? I thought that was pretty badass. I enjoyed that.
Tamara Morrison, yes, sir.
Yeah, he's a good actor.
It would be funny if there's some crazy think piece. Like, look, I'm obviously, you guys know I'm very liberal, but there's on some ultra liberal site where there's some crazy think piece where it's like somebody dealing with like a heart attack needs to consent to CPR. Like, I could totally see some dumb article like that with some of the crazy shit that we get. But yeah, no, definitely perform CPR if somebody needs it.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised anymore with the silly shit that you see every day, that double and triple consent just for a high five. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that, they've got to give you a certain look or a nod before you can give them CPR. It's like, but they're unconscious. What do you want me to do? Ryan, you being the biggest badass amongst us, Aquaman has always been a bit of a laughingstock. With the casting of the massive tattooed Jason Momoa, would you be inclined to poke fun at the character in front of him?
Probably not. No, he's which made, the cynical part of me is like, well, okay, so they picked like who's like the manliest actor in Hollywood that you can get to play that character, and they got him. That was kind of step one towards, okay, Aquaman's no longer a joke, but I think he did a great job, and I think he's like the perfect actor, for that role and for what they wanted to do, with that character. So yeah, no, he definitely plays the intimidating guy. And it was kind of funny, that scene in the bar where the guy's asking for a photo and he's kind of a dick initially, but then they're all kind of taking pictures and having a good time. That was a nice little, scene of levity. And, it's cool that he has that side of he can be intimidating, but he can also be kind of fun, and outgoing and kind of a guy that you'd want to have a beer with.
Now, I find it funny that you say that, find the manliest man in Hollywood and they got him. I'm sorry, Hugh Jackman did not play Aquaman.
Wow. But meanwhile, we're saying the manliest man, and Jason Momoa has long hair and sometimes wears eyeliner, and Hugh Jackman does nothing but musicals anymore. So,
yeah, that's true.
The line of the manliest man really has shifted over the years, but I don't think you'd see John Wayne doing either of those things. I think it's a refreshing change, but probably the older generation just would shake their heads and not understand.
But did you see his get up on Saturday Night Live? Like, he definitely is out there. Well, really, like, look, no matter what we want to say, the manliest man in Hollywood is Tom Cruise. Like, just
he does his own stunts and everything else he does, and he's like 5'6".
Pound, like, he's tiny, and the stuff he does, like, he's got balls bigger than any. Like, I wouldn't do an eighth of the stunts he does. So I gotta say, he's got to be the manliest man in Hollywood. Just on the strength.
He strapped his ass to the outside of an airplane that they ran down a runway. I'm not doing that.
I pull a muscle getting in and out of the shower. I'm not hanging off of some tower in Dubai just to prove a point. Get some dude that looks like me and let him do it, because I'm not falling off this thing. Tragedy struck today. No, sorry. I'm a millionaire. I'm not doing my own stunts. IG pre the Aquaman days, Arthur Curry stops a sub hijacking and simply walks away and lets Manta's father die. Were you surprised by this decision, or were they shooting for more of an anti-hero Punisher-like vibe?
I don't know. I was thinking maybe he might not have let that happen to him, but they kept shooting at him. I mean, if somebody's doing that to you or acting that way toward you, are you going to go out of your way when you come out of that unscathed to try and help them out so they don't die from whatever repercussions they just had? I kind of see what's going on. It's not really anti-hero, but it's not really hero. There's got to be a little middle ground in that. And I thought that was not bad, but not good. I mean, I was kind of conflicted when that happened in the movie. And it's one of those things where I kind of like the way they went with it, because a traditional superhero, quote unquote, would never let harm come to them if he could prevent it. And one of the things that all of these movies have started doing is allow harm to come to people rather than just simply dropping them in jail or something else. And it's a different angle, and Marvel is doing it too, so it's not just DC. DC's just a little darker about it, and they'll let you basically watch somebody die. But it's an interesting new way because superheroes are shown then to be able to be made mistakes. They can do things wrong. They can do things that aren't morally on one side or the other. They're morally gray. So it's an interesting thing. And Aquaman is one of those, if you watch the old Super Friends growing up, like Cinik and I did, I'm sure, you just didn't expect that to happen from Aquaman, and that's really the only Aquaman any of us really knew coming into this.
If you look at the comic books, there wasn't a lot of Aquaman other than the Justice League. He didn't have 2 or 3 titles like the rest of them. But Ryan, that leads me to another interesting question before you get to your point. We're all wrestling marks, like you've said in the past, and wrestling's gone this way, but has storytelling outgrown the pure snowy white, ivory white hat?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we demand, I guess, if for lack of a better word, like more nuanced storytelling and characters. So, none of us expect anything that's that, kind of black and white hero versus villain. And I think maybe that's part of the issue with the DC characters. And the reason why kind of Batman has been the only real successful DC movie or of the DC characters, give or take, movies here and there. But going back to that, the point about Aquaman kind of letting Manta's father die, I think it was a poignant moment, but it was kind of misplaced because that had a place in another story. I feel like that moment belonged as the central, kind of part of a fully realized story, and it wasn't. It was just kind of like your secondary or tertiary plot. And so I feel like when they do go for the sequel where it is Manta versus Aquaman, you don't have that scene, and so it loses its meaning. So I feel like it was an important scene for the character, but it did a disservice to Manta, to a future movie. And I feel like just that whole story and secondary plot was unnecessary for this. You could have really put that in another movie and had it be far, far more effective. I
liked Manta in this movie, but are you thinking that he was pretty much unnecessary to making the movie go, or that they could have just stuck with the Atlanta storyline and they would have been fine? It would have been enough content and we just bring him back for the sequel? Yeah,
you could have made up another character to put in that role. Because, effectively Manta's, again, he's like a, low-level bad guy for him to defeat, and they could have had somebody else in that position, especially since Manta is an important character for him, and it looks like they're setting up Manta to be the main villain in the next movie. So yeah, I just think he was out of place because he clearly that moment was important and huge, and I feel like it was just out of place as like a secondary thing because it did nothing for this plot. Like, okay, so it fueled Manta's desire to get back at him, but in a secondary plot, and he was just kind of there. He shows up, he gets defeated. You think he's dead. Ooh, he's back, and he'll be the main character in the next movie. And assuming that Manta's the main character, if you put that moment in the next movie, that's the driving force. That's his driving force, and I think it means a lot more seeing that in the movie in which he's the main villain than seeing it as just like a throwaway scene to show why the secondary villain in this movie is kind of upset with Aquaman.
So I think agreeing with Ryan here that the length of this movie alone says that they could have taken Manta out and just really wiped everything that he did out of this movie, and like places where he showed up that was important to drive this movie, like when they were out in that desert town or something and Manta and his cronies all showed up. Just take Manta out of that and just have the cronies show up and chase him through the town. You take all that out and the movie is still sufficiently long, because this was better than 2.5 hours, I believe. It's a very long movie. Get down to closer to 2 hours, and I think as well as this has done so far, it could have done even better. I think one of the weak points of this movie is its length, and they're trying to stretch out things that don't need to be stretched out. You need a good pace, and they lost some pacing at times in this.
Well, with as many of them as we're getting, and I understand in these big, huge, complex movies like the team movies like Avengers, that we need the length to tell the story. But do you feel, IG, that these movies are getting a little too long?
Well, especially when you're talking about the solo movies, they're getting a little bit long. When it's a single superhero in the movie, I think anything past 2.25 is probably too long. You're telling too much of a story or trying to jam too many things in there. And the problem that happens is then you end up with like Spider-Man 3, where you basically used everything good in the first 2 Spider-Mans and are digging the bottom of the barrel to get a good villain to fight with. And we all remember what kind of a mess that ended up being. Same thing with The Amazing Spider-Man 2. You know, the way they dug to try and get something good there because they burned everything they could use up in the first one. When you do these things and you stick everybody in the movie, you're taking those possibilities away from further movies. This would have been okay to do Origin all on its own and let us watch Aquaman grow up. Let us watch Aquaman go down and become King of the Sea and defeat all the other oncomers that wanted to take that role. There's plenty that could have been done, and there were already bad guys in the movie that were intriguing enough that they just really pushed an extra 30 minutes of movie on us just so that they could put Manta in, which is really the only guy in the rogues gallery for Aquaman that any of us knew, and we knew it from Super Friends.
Probably a better way to handle it would have been have his father be one of the sailors that go down in the ship, you know, him being upset about it, but then they deal with it in the cutscenes at the end of the movie. Like one of the cutscenes being him getting his armor and weapons from somebody in Atlantis that didn't like what just went down with Aquaman. And then you could have introduced him in the movie, but not kind of saturated us with a, you know, could have just tickle our ass with a feather a little bit. Ryan, Aquaman is a very CGI reliant film. Most of it taking place underwater in the lost city of Atlantis with shark mouths and monsters and all of it very, very lavish. Did it really work in this movie?
Yeah, it did. I think it worked. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't, hyper real, but I think the setting being in the water, I think it gave him a bit of room, a good deal of room for error. And I think just the sheer kind of spectacle of it, added to the experience. So I think, where with some movies, when it becomes heavy on CGI, I think Black Panther is a good example. I think I was really critical of the CGI, especially in the third act. I think in this, it's, not that the CGI was all that much better, but because it was just so batshit crazy, I mean, and you just had so much insanity in some of the scenes, and it was underwater. I think that to a large extent kind of took away from any, that kind of critical eye. So I think for the most part, the CGI works. I think, look, it's still not, I didn't love, it wasn't the greatest thing ever, wasn't the best action I've ever seen. But for what it is, I think they did a really good job with the CGI, and I was never kind of taken out of it, where I am sometimes in a lot of these movies, especially when you get to like the third act.
Well, and I wonder if that's because of the setting as well. We've never been that deep in the sea. We've never seen those creatures or how they move. So you don't have anything to really compare it to. You're more in love with the fact that you're further underwater than most people will ever be, or further out in space than most people will ever be. And the CGI doesn't take it out of you. There's no deer on top of the trash heap moment to kind of take you out of it. The CGI is one of the things in the movie that worked for me. Visually, I thought it was very pleasing. It worked. I don't think they could have done that like 10 or 15 years ago. It wouldn't have looked as real as it does now. And who knows what comes 10 or 15 years later. Maybe we get an even more enhanced experience. But I kind of wish I would have seen it in 3D and been able to experience it that way. I thought it was really good. IG, what'd you think of the CGI?
I thought it was spot on, and what they did was exactly what you guys said. They went underwater, and then they said that their vision was capable of enhancing where they were at. So they were able to take an environment that if we go down and look at it, it's maybe dark and dreary and stuff like that, but we were able to see it through an Atlantean's eyes, where everything really just blew up and sparkled and was full of light and life. And it was really almost a fantasy world that we can imagine is based in our own world. So like you could see coral and fish and other things that belong in the sea, but lit up more based upon what an Atlantean would see. And okay, Atlanteans aren't real, but they're giving us that moment of disbelief, which really, really worked well. The CGI was clean. It was effective. There weren't any places in it that really made me feel like this is so fake. And I know it's fake. It's a superhero movie. That's fine. But to take you out of it, that when things look really bad, that happens. So nothing in this really did that to me, at least as far as the visual look of the movie. It was very clean, very well done.
Ryan, the director James Wan is a very established name in Hollywood, directing some of the Saw movies, Fast 7, The Conjuring. He had his choice. DC gave him his choice, Aquaman or Flash. He went with Team Atlantis. Do you agree with the decision?
Now, yeah, I think so. I think that this movie kind of required the spectacle that, you know, I guess maybe you get in in a Fast and Furious movie, and I think I think it lent itself well to this. I'd say I still wasn't thrilled with some of the quips. The humor wasn't, at Marvel level where you kind of want it. I think, or not that it wasn't Marvel level, because I think some of the Marvel humor can be a little too quippy too. But I think it was trying to be Marvel, but being unsuccessful at doing that instead of doing its own thing. And I think I was kind of excited. What's the guy's name that did Dope that was supposed to do Flash, and he dropped out. But I think the people who've been brought up for the Flash movie, especially with the actor playing the Flash, I thought would have been a little bit better for that character and for the type of humor that I would like to have seen the movie go for. So I think he made the right choice going for Aquaman over the Flash.
Just to add on to your point there, Ryan, one of the things that I think that's impressive for James Wan, if you have the choice between Aquaman and the Flash, if you want to make a much more visually impressive movie, Aquaman is the way to go, because Flash exists in our world. So you can make it impressive, but it's still going to look like everything looks like now. If you want freedom to create and make something look beautiful, you need to go in under the sea and create things there, because you have free reign to go any direction you'd like with Aquaman, where you're still stuck in the constraints of it has to look like our world, even though we don't have Gotham and Metropolis and things like that. They are still reminiscent of our current cities. So I think that for the creative mind, that's the way to go, unless you're going to do the time traveling Flash, which lets you go in any direction, forward, backwards, anything like that, which I don't know if they're going to do when they do the very first Flash movie, at least not much distance forward or backward. Might just be small movements in the Speed Force to go forward and back in time.
Yeah, I kind of hope they don't deal with this time travel, but that seems to be chained to the Flash. I thought it was a ballsy move because the Flash is the safe bet. He's a more well-known character, but it's been done before. So why not tackle something new, take the whole crew and head to the CGI stage and go under the sea? It worked. It was a good idea. It was a much better choice than the Flash would have been. I'm not in love with, I believe his name is Ezra Miller, who's playing the Flash. I'm not in love with him. I really think they should have used the kid from the WB show. I enjoyed this a lot more than I think I would of a Flash movie, and I'm interested to see if we'll actually get one. So let's talk the villains a little bit. Black Manta and Aquaman's half-brother, King Orm. Black Manta, fueled by rage and Millennium Tech, super suit and weapons. Visually very impressive. Looks like he's returning for the sequel. IG, what were your thoughts on their take of this super villain that we've kind of been staring at since we were young kids watching Justice League? I mean, on the Justice League, he was kind of clunky and really just odd looking with a weird voice, but you give him some Millennium Tech, some super weapons. Did it work?
Well, I think remembering back to Justice League and Super Friends and things like that as a kid, basically he was like Aquaman, but not as cool. He could swim underwater and he had a big cool helmet, but other than that, he didn't really have any power or any tech or anything like that. I think he had a ship that he could ride around undersea with, but other than that, nothing. The Atlantean tech made Black Manta a very, very cool character. I think, and it was deep enough that we saw a little bit of his motivation come early in the movie that I think that, like we said earlier, I think he's being wasted, and I hope that they are able to keep some motivation going for the sequel on this, because I think, like Ryan said earlier, it'd have been better used to do at either the end of this movie or at the beginning of the next, rather than burn it at the beginning of this movie, because people are going to forget where the motivation to be Black Manta comes from. They're just going to say that Black Manta's here. And that's kind of weakens your character a little bit. But I do like the character much better than the one that I saw when I was a kid. And it is very cool. And as long as they continue to supply him with tech, because Aquaman seemed a little bit formidable against it at this point, So they're going to need to get him some new stuff as it comes around. I think he'll be a force to be reckoned with.
Well, even though we don't feel that he should have been in the first movie, just the look, the weaponry, his motivation, Ryan, do you want to see him back for the sequels? And would he be a formidable foe? Or is it Aquaman already kind of dealt with this and maybe we should move on to something else?
No, I think he's definitely a formidable foe. Like I said, I think they dropped the ball on that, because no matter what, it's like you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, and they again that kind of emotional weight that it meant something in the movie we saw. It's just that you now have context from another movie to put into the sequel where he's the main character, main villain, assuming he's the main villain. Maybe he's not. So I just think unless they make him a secondary villain in the next movie and he's just kind of like this threat that's always there, but he's never like the main villain, maybe that's the route they're going to go. But I think I did like the actor. I like the character. I like the costume design. I like the kind of idea behind why his costume was designed the way it was, and just based on what he was able to do with the Atlantean tech and his own fighting skills, like he definitely is formidable. I just think they dropped the ball by having that scene in this movie when they could have, they could, as you guys mentioned, like they could have had the father in this one be the foe and then him kill the father in the first movie, and then there it is. There's your motivation for the villain.
IG, it being the holidays, families get together and then they do their best to pretend they like each other and get along for what little time they can stomach to be around each other. But what if your family was dead set on world domination? Arthur's brother, King Orm, he was willing to pull out all the stops to destroy the surface world because he blames them for the way they treat the ocean and how they're polluting it and destroying it. Was he a worthy adversary for Aquaman? And like Thanos, did you see his point even just a little?
I did see his point, and maybe he's a little bit right, because realistically, like 90% of the life on the planet lives in the oceans. And we have just been destroying our oceans for some time. And thankfully, we're starting to come around a little bit and maybe take a little bit better care of the planet and our oceans, even though our current lifestyles and everything really aren't leading toward that, because we all still want to drive cars and we all still want to fly in planes that aren't really great for the environment, but we're trying to get better. And that's neither here nor there. I see exactly what King Orm is trying to say, or Prince Orm probably, because he's not really the king. I think he would have been enough of a villain to drive this movie. I think because of the way they set up the different areas of the ocean and the different ruling areas that could all lead into one King of the Sea or whatever they were calling it. I think that would have been enough to drive this movie. And maybe it wouldn't have been quite as exciting, but I think it would have been more cohesive, because what ended up happening is it got kind of messy with the amount of different things that were going on. So I really did like the different things going on and the different people that from under the sea, the different classes and species and people that were Atlanteans, I think really worked very well, especially King Orm.
Ryan, at what point do we not know who to, like wrestling, when Stone Cold Steve Austin kind of flipped out, he became the good guy in the middle of the match and the good guy became the bad guy. I think it was Bret Hart. At what point does the storytelling become so complicated that we're not quite sure who to root for? These villains stand higher and higher on the moral high ground anymore. I mean, they're climbing to the top, and it's almost like their quest is equal to the hero's quest. At what point do we stop knowing who to root for?
That I think to me that makes for good storytelling. Actually, it's funny you asked that. You bring up the question because, for me, I've been working on a novel. Like I've been just doing this I've had this idea for years, and I finally started writing. And I've actually run into this issue where I'm writing so well for the villain that it's almost doing a double switch, and I'm like kind of concerned. But I do think that kind of makes for interesting storytelling, because then you don't know quite who to root for, and I think it's great because we get all these kind of often we do get these kind of one note villains who they just want world domination for no reason. I think in this movie, I think they didn't do enough to really add that, to really show his side. Where I think Black Panther did an amazing job with Killmonger and really showcasing his reason for why he was who he was and what he did. I think they didn't quite hit that with Orm. And the other thing was he was so powerful that if they could just return all the garbage back to like back to the beaches, why couldn't they just do that instead of like waging war on humanity? And that's not my idea. I read that somewhere, or heard that somewhere, but I think they could have done a better job of really arguing his point and then leaving it to the viewer to figure out, okay, and then that's part of the hero's journey then. So if you have a villain who has a rational idea, but an irrational kind of action, the hero still has to learn from it. And I think that's what we got in Black Panther, where he learns from that and he makes the change because of that. So he actually does learn from the villain. And I think that's where you have that divide or that difference between the hero and the villain. I think is that the villain is so blindly focused on one thing that even if they do have some of the right arguments on their side, they're so militant in their approach that is kind of beyond reproach, where the hero then does and should learn from that.
Not to jump out of or get off topic, IG, but the state of the DC universe gets kind of interesting from here on out, because we took two very nice steps forward with Wonder Woman and Aquaman, but then we take two steps back with the loss of the actors for Batman and Superman, Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill. Can you still build on what you have left with Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman and Jason Momoa's Aquaman and maybe Ezra Miller's Flash?
I think so. I think you can build forward, and I think you can replace Ben Affleck's Batman and Henry Cavill's Superman, and it would be okay. We've been through a bunch of Batmans already. Nobody's had any problem. We went Michael Keaton all the way up through Michael Keaton, George Clooney, Val Kilmer. We've had our share of Batmans, and nobody really batted an eye at any of it, except for when they were first announcing Michael Keaton, because they're like, no way a comedic actor can't be Batman. And it ended up that he did a pretty good job. And we get Christian Bale, who redid everything, still a good Batman. And Ben Affleck, for all the flack he got, I think did fairly well as Batman. For the most part, I would have done some things differently, but those whole movies needed to have something done differently. So I think recasting those, maybe since we've had good success with Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman and Jason Momoa as Aquaman, recasting the weak parts so far, which would be Batman and Superman, maybe gets better ideas for new stories in the future. So that's what I'm hoping, because I don't think it's a good Justice League or a good thing to do without Batman and Superman, because they've always kind of been the pinnacle of DC. So to go without them, I think would be like it would not be a good move to go without them.
Yeah, they call them the Holy Trinity. There's no way that you go forward with the Justice League movie. DC's roster is just not that deep. I mean, they do this thing in the beginning, an intro card where they throw all their heroes and villains standing there behind the DC background, and I don't know 3/4 of them. And I consider myself a pretty big comic book fan, but in the end, Arthur Curry returns, becomes king, beats his brother. Ryan, your thoughts on the final battle, the movie, and your rating?
I have kind of mixed feelings about the movie. I think I had low-ish expectations, so I definitely surpassed my expectations. I think the movie wanted to be kind of Star Wars, Guardians of the Galaxy, kind of space opera in the sea. And in some ways it really did succeed. I think it was batshit crazy. The set pieces were insane. And I think it was able to kind of lean on that insanity in order to create kind of a visually really interesting movie. And they did some crazy things visually with it. I think Jason Momoa was great, great casting choice for that character, and makes you kind of forget the kind of joke that Aquaman had become in kind of pop culture. That being said, I think, like I mentioned earlier, it often the humor it's like trying to be like Marvel, but then it just comes across as just bad jokes. And I kind of wish that we could get something a little bit smarter, a little bit better, from that perspective, with the humor. I think I didn't love Orm as a villain. I think Black Manta was a far better villain, far more interesting, and as we discussed kind of ad nauseum, would make, they kind of wasted him a little bit in this movie. But again, it was a fun ride. It was meant to be crazy. It didn't take itself too seriously. So I would give it a 7.5.
This movie was actually a pretty good movie for a DC movie, and that's kind of the qualifier that I'm going to put on this. I think it was well above Batman vs. Superman or Justice League, but it was still significantly below Wonder Woman. But I enjoyed it. I think that the biggest problem they had with this one is its length. It was too long. They tried to tell too much story, and they could have lessened it by about a half an hour, and I think they'd have been in better shape. But visually, the movie is impressive, really well acted. Humor was a little bit sophomoric at times for me, especially with trying to say I could have just peed on it. That one just sticks in my craw for whatever reason. I didn't like that joke, but there were other ones like it that just seemed kind of dumb and sophomoric, just like the battle, the very first time that he fought with King Orm in Atlantis, and he's like, from where I'm from, it's called an ass whooping. Yeah, come on. You weren't taught any better than that, and that's what we're going to come up with, and that's the part of Aquaman that I didn't really agree with. I love Jason Momoa. I think he's perfect for this role. I think they need to write better for him. That being said, it was still an enjoyable movie, still a lot of fun to watch, and I would give it an 8.
Before we recorded this, I was looking at the box office totals, and believe it or not, Aquaman has taken home worldwide over $1 billion. You're right. It was long. You're right. Maybe one too many villains in the kitchen. You're right. The humor was, but I enjoyed this movie, even though it was more of a cookie cutter type origin film. Visually, it worked on every single level. Jason was more than believable, and I think it was the right direction for this character. I enjoyed what they did with the villains, at least in my childhood, which were better known for just being odd looking, and the foil to the Justice League's misfit. The hero worked, the villain worked, the storyline was fun. I learned not to trust women that I find on the beach, and the CGI kept me pacified. I'll give it a 7.5 too, in hopes that the sequel breaks a little bit more in different ground.
So it's time for a little bit of news. Later on in this year, now in 2019, we're going to finally get some more superhero movies, some new original ones with superheroes we haven't met yet. And the first one that I'm really excited about is Shazam. And Shazam star Zachary Levi says that a future team-up with Justice League would be amazing. And it looks like we're heading that direction. And what do you guys think? Putting Shazam into the Justice League, there were times when I remember growing up, first of all, Shazam used to have his own cartoon, but at times he would show up in the superheroes or in the Super Friends.
DC is in this weird spot where they're not quite sure where to go, what's going to happen with the DCEU, because I think they were kind of on the cusp of just scrapping everything. But you had Aquaman and Wonder Woman are these massive successes amongst the EU movies, which have been pretty, at best mediocre. At worst disastrous. So they're in a weird spot where I don't know that they're even thinking about Justice League. I don't know if they should be thinking about Justice League. I think that I like where they seem to be going with focusing on one movie at a time, one hero at a time. I love the way this Joker movie looks, and I love that they've got James Gunn on board for Suicide Squad. So I think I'd rather them kind of focus on let's make each movie its own thing and deal with it like that rather than do an extended universe thing. But if they do go through the Justice League again, all power to it. If Shazam's good, great. But yeah, we still need, there's going to be the Batman and the Superman problem and trying to put everything together, which I think DC just they didn't put the groundwork that Marvel did. And they're trying to play catch up. So I kind of would rather see them focus more on each movie as individual movies rather than trying to, put together another Justice League anytime soon.
I don't know the first thing about Shazam's character, but I am excited for it because Zach Levi's a part of the project. I've loved him since Chuck. He was great in the Marvelous Miss Maisel, and I think he's going to be really good in this. And I'm really psyched about Shazam because I know at some point that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is going to be his foil as the Black Adam. So I want to see these movies. I don't know if we should put the cart before the horse and just naturally include him into the Justice League, but I have a feeling that it'll be well worth it, and he definitely will earn his spot in it.
Next thing I want to talk about, I'm hugely excited about this. All right. We here at the Cinik Radio podcast, if you go back and listen, we loved The Punisher. We've always loved The Walking Dead. And one of our favorite people, John Barenthal, along with Vera Farmiga, are joining the Sopranos prequel. So we're going to get him in something new because, quite honestly, Disney and Netflix not shaking hands anymore, and they're starting to take our properties away from Netflix, so we're not going to get any more Punisher. So I need John Barenthal somewhere. And why not doing something with The Sopranos. That stuff is amazing. What do you guys think?
You can't take anything away from what David Chase did over the 6 seasons of The Sopranos. The finale doesn't wipe away the amazing content that they've brought us. I've been rewatching the season since it's the 20th anniversary. I'm really more compelled with it than I was. The fact that he's leading this project and the casting is going well. I don't know who he's going to play since it's a prequel, but I'm really, really interested, and I can't kind of wait to see this. I don't go crazy every time they bring a TV show to a movie, but to me, The Sopranos always were like little mini movies, and it always had a big screen feel to it. And what can you say about John Barenthal? Everything I've seen this guy in, from Walking Dead to The Wolf of Wall Street to The Punisher, you can't go wrong with the guy. He is an A-class actor, and he's an A-lister in my book. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I agree. I think he's come into his own as a kind of a lead, because I think for a long time he's kind of always been the kind of supporting guy, the friend or the foil or the comic relief, but he really has, with Punisher, come into his own as a leading man. And I don't know that he's been cast as a lead in the show, but if he is, I think it's something that has a huge amount of cachet, obviously, with the history of the show. And I think he's got the chops to lead that. And I think, when it was announced, I kind of thought, that's kind of perfect. Like, it makes sense that he would be in, in the Sopranos movie. So, hope he is lead. And I think he'd do great in that role. So I'm excited to see what they're writing and what he brings to the table. I think with any of these, it's always tricky to kind of catch lightning in a bottle twice, and you hope that you get something good. And I think you're right, like a movie makes sense. It's kind of slightly different format, but something that doesn't feel like they're going to be rebooting it, but they'll give us something that kind of will whet the appetite a little bit. So yeah, I'm hoping it's good, and I think he's the right choice.
The next thing I want to talk about, it's really kind of good news and bad news for gamers out there. Bungie, the huge game developer of Destiny and Destiny 2, along with some other things, recently announced that it's splitting with its publisher Activision, and has acquired the rights to the Destiny franchise. So they're leaving and taking Destiny home with them. Apparently, players have reacted joyfully on Reddit, and Bungie employees themselves reportedly cheered and popped champagne when the news was shared at a team meeting. The problem that can happen here is Activision throws all the money at this. Bungie gets money from Activision to develop things. Bungie probably has a stockpile of money sitting around so they can keep going, but this is probably going to end up with a little bit of lull in development from either one of these places, because Bungie was one of Activision's biggest publishers outside of Blizzard, and Bungie was really just doing the things right, and Activision was getting them to put things out right. This ended because basically Activision was sticking their fingers in too deeply and meddling in how they're trying to make their games over Bungie, so Bungie decided to split. Does this spell chaos in the future of other big publishing houses like EA and places like that, where big developers could leave to try and do their own thing if this works out for Bungie?
Well, this is really symptomatic of, and it's not as much Activision as it is EA, the overlords of everything. There's a really great video, and if you're a video game fanatic like IG and I are, by a guy named SkillUp, and he talks about the loot box phenomenon, and it was basically started at EA, and now every game has been forced to kind of follow that motto because they're making tens of billions of dollars off it. They make tons more money off of selling you digital content than they do the actual game. And this is an EA problem. It started with them, and they constantly they buy these small software guys, pick them up, and then kind of almost turn them out like a prostitute, and then they end up closing them. So this is a good thing all around for everybody. We need to, I understand that it's a business and you're trying to make money, but stop raping people for every nickel and dime when it comes to this digital content thing. I have a feeling that if we get to see a Destiny 3, it'll be worlds better. And Activision, they need to figure out a way to get out from under Electronic Arts and move on, because Electronic Arts is the world's worst company.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to this because I'm not a big gamer anymore, but I think one of the things that one of the reasons why I don't is I think the way games are now, it seems like it's just a cash grab. I think, you feel like when you buy a game, you buy it, it's yours, that's it. And it's nice that you get extra content, but then, the trade-off for extra content seems to be that you're constantly paying more and more, and whether it's loot boxes or subscriptions or, even iPhone games, even iPhone apps I'm finding now have kind of taken on this model where like, I do 3D printing stuff, and there was a couple, like with the new iPhone, it has a nice, the kind of 3D capabilities of it are pretty cool. So you can build a 3D scanner into the phone. So I was looking for like a good 3D scanner that's already built into the phone, but all of them require you to pay for a subscription for a year. And it's kind of like, it's just this has kind of permeated other aspects of like our digital world, which is really frustrating because, I kind of want the days where you buy software and that's it. You don't need to deal with any of this, ridiculousness of having to constantly pay more and more and more for something fairly simple and straightforward.
IG, do you remember the days when you could just spend $50 on a game and you actually got the whole game and they didn't sell you pieces later?
Yeah, and there was no DLC.
Season passes.
No season passes. You didn't have to buy expansions. And if you did buy expansions, they were whole new games. They weren't just little bits or maps added onto the game that you got. It was an entire new game. Even with like Warcraft, when they would come into the new expansions for that, it was a whole new experience. And now they'll sell you a partial game for $60, and you can't even be competitive in the game unless you go and spend another $60, $100, $200, $500 to buy everything else to keep up with everyone else. And EA really was the harbinger of all of that. So I'm hoping that this works out for Bungie so that other developers will leave and try and create the content they want to create rather than be stuck in the rut of what EA says they have to do. Because they're really the people holding the ball right now. Now, Activision was doing a little bit of this, but they're doing it in reaction to everything that was already happening in the industry. They had to do it to keep up. I don't believe Activision has an intent to do that going forward. Not all of their games have had these problems. Blizzard is still doing fine where you can play any of Blizzard's games, not buy any of the things that you can buy off of the Blizzard store, and be just as competitive as somebody who buys everything off of those places. So I think their hearts are in the right place. They just made some bad decisions with the things they were doing with Bungie. I think we can see some good things in the gaming industry from this split. My next story is the brand new Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is a Twitter powerhouse. Right now, she's second only to the POTUS as far as how many people are listening to her tweets on a daily basis. So far, from her inception on Twitter in 2008 to just this past week, she's had 11.8 million retweets, and most of them have happened in the last 6 months as she went through becoming elected, becoming a congresswoman of color in the next Congress of the United States of America. I'm truly impressed by this woman, and she is absolutely not atrocious. She's absolutely fierce and hilarious on Twitter all at the same time. She's got it where it counts, ladies and gentlemen. And if you need someone to follow, it's at AOC on Twitter. What do you guys think of her?
She's my congresswoman, so I actually did, had the chance to vote for her and kind of read up on her a lot prior to the primary. I think she's polarizing clearly, but she kind of gave every nerd. There was probably a few million nerdgasms this week when she wrote something along the lines of basically there's this big article because the cool thing about her is she's not just going after people on the right, but also people on the left whom she also, has major disagreements with. And I have too, someone on the left, I think I've had major disagreements with a lot of the way the establishment runs. And so there was this article about how they're basically trying to rein her in, they're trying to use both the carrot and the stick approach and keep her, try to get, because she has such a loud voice and such a huge platform with so many followers that they kind of want to take advantage of that, but they need to rein her in. And her response was, something along the lines of, to quote the great Alan Moore, I'm not stuck in here with you, you're stuck in with me. And that was just great. It's hilarious. And it just set Twitter on fire.
Well, we need somebody to shake the system up, right or left. I don't care what team you play for, but somebody has to kick the system right in its face and get it going. Because right now we've got people that are entrenched and don't do anything and allow the government to sit in a quagmire. And the fact that we have somebody shaking things up, whether you agree with her message or not, you have to respect the drive. You have to respect that she won't be silenced and she'll push back against the establishment, because that's what we need. That's what government was all about. I mean, they've been floating talk about term limits, and I pray more than anything that this happens. Enough of this career politician. We need people in and out of there. We need new ideas. We need new blood. We don't need Strom Thurmond, who was like 180 years old, and I'm pretty sure he was Nosferatu when he died, was still in the chair, didn't have his right mind, and they still kept electing him. It's enough already. So hats off to her. I love the fact that she quoted some Watchmen, and I'm going to watch her career pretty intently.
So speaking of having to kick our government in gear, the last thing I want to talk about this week is the government shutdown here in the United States. We're now ending our 24th day of the government shutdown. No end in sight. It's leaving hundreds of thousands of federal workers without a regular income. Most of the Department of Homeland Security's 245,000 plus employees are classified as essential, meaning that they have to go to work and not get a paycheck until they decide to restart the government. Meanwhile, they have rent to pay. They got to buy food. They have bills that are going to go. And right now, one of the answers that they've given is they've written a letter that they can apparently give to creditors and say, if you'd be nice and let me hold off on my bills for a while, I'd appreciate it. Except that the grocery store is unlikely to take this to pay for the steak they want to bring home. I'm a little upset. A previous government employee myself, I took pride in going to work and doing my job every day. But part of that pride was also in that I was being paid a fair wage for a fair job. I did my job. I got paid. And you know what? This is just a power grab to try and get something that was promised that somebody else would pay for to try and get this done. I'm really kind of disgusted at really both sides of this for not either coming some way to, because our Senate and our Congress could push a government through, could push funding through and everything without POTUS's consent with enough votes. And neither one of them decide they want to come through and just make this happen. What do you guys think?
Well, I don't like getting political on the show, but first off, fuck your wall. It doesn't work. They have tunnels. They have ladders. Throwing $5 billion or $10 billion at it's an antiquated thought process. And secondly, I blame the employees, the government employees, as much as I blame the government on this, because if you're an essential employee, that means you deserve a paycheck, because there's a word for something like that, for making people work without compensation, and I thought we dealt with that hundreds of years ago. It's time for these people to walk off their jobs. You guys both work for a living. How long would you show up at your job without being paid? It's time for the TSA agents to pack up their shit and go home, and we'll come back when this is settled, because when air travel stops, when security at airport stops, and all the other things that are going on with these people working without pay, when all that stops, I guarantee you that this will be settled. This is a pissing competition between the two parties, and it makes me sick because the people in the middle are the ones that suffer.
One day, I dream of a world where we have actual public servants running our government, and I think that's the issue. Whether no matter what side you're on, I think the one area where we could all agree is I don't think many people have much faith in our leaders as being people who really care for us. They're career politicians. They're there to, score the big gig as a lobbyist. There are very few, maybe I can count on one hand the ones that I can really think are actual public servants, and even those, like you always run that risk of becoming kind of a rock star and becoming, more than that, and it's frustrating because, look, I think in this case POTUS is to blame for the shutdown, but it's a symptom of a larger issue, and it's one where these guys aren't there for us. They're there for their corporate backers. They're there for, again, whatever big gig they get. They're not there for us, and so no matter whose fault it is right now, until we fix the problem, which is kind of the money in politics and the fact that big corporations are the ones that they're beholden to. I just see this. It'll happen again. It happened in 2013. It's happening now. It'll happen again. And no matter who's to blame, again, it's just, this is a symptom of a larger issue with our government that I just don't think we have representatives that actually represent us or care to represent us.
And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, I always say, no matter who you are, learn a little bit about your politicians, especially your representatives, and get out and vote. Voting is your civic duty if you're a citizen of these United States. Make sure and go out and vote.
IG, if this was going on and you were still part of the TSA, how long would you go to work without a check?
About 3.5 minutes. And I would be calling in sick every day until they started to say they were going to give me another paycheck. And I would expect to get paid for every day that I did call in sick without using any sick time.
I love how they placate everybody and say, well, SNAP and WIC and all these programs are still fine for now. And they're pointing these people that aren't getting paychecks towards those programs. What happens when those programs aren't fine? Because we're going to get to that point if this doesn't get settled. So it's time for them to stop sitting on their hands and work something out. I don't think a wall is an answer, and there has to be a happy medium somewhere.
No, I agree. I think, that's the other issue is that, like, border security, totally for it. Right now, it does not seem like a wall is effective but it's optics and it's politics. And I think it's just this game that we play constantly. And it's sad for people who do have government jobs that aren't getting a paycheck because there are real kind of consequences to this and there are real people suffering. And yeah, it just sucks. I wish they really, if you want to shut down the government, shut down the entire government and let's see how long it lasts with no military and no nothing running, that wouldn't happen, so this kind of fake shutdown where they effectively force people into labor who may or may not get paid while other people are going to go into severe debt, probably have their credit ruined, all for this kind of
I believe that
charade.
Activity was emancipated, sir. The Emancipation Proclamation said they can no longer do that.
Exactly. We dealt with this.
Government employee. Exactly.
We dealt with this hundreds of years ago. You don't work without
force
getting
us
paid.
to just go to work for nothing. They can't force you, whether you're an employee or not. The only exception would really be military who have signed contracts, and there is stipulations in those contracts saying that they will get paid X amount of dollars in exchange for continuing to perform as a soldier. So even they have to get paid according to their contract. So, as much as we talk about this, there is not a single person in the United States of America that should be working for this government in any shape, way, or form without some form of compensation, short of congressmen, senators, and public servants. Because you know what? If they're going to shut these guys' money down, then maybe they shouldn't take a paycheck either. And that's going to do it for another super-powered episode of the Cinik Radio Podcast. I'm Igrihe, here with my sidekicks, Cinik and Ryan. We had a great time doing this week's show talking about Aquaman, some geek news, the future of gaming, and the government shutdown. We don't like to do a lot of politics, but it's a big deal right now in the country we live in, so we wanted to touch base on it a little bit. Continue to like, listen, and subscribe. We care about every listen we get to. Share this with all your friends and family. You can find us over at CINIKRADIO.com. Send us email at the show at CINIKRADIO.com. Find us on Twitter at CINIKRADIO, on Facebook at Facebook.com/CINIKRADIO, or you can head over to tpublic.com and search for Cinik, C-I-N-I-K, and get your own Cinik Radio podcast gear. T-shirts, hats, cups, mugs, and anything else your little heart could desire. It all goes to support the show, and we really would appreciate anything you can do there. Thanks again for all your support through all these things, and make sure and send us any crazy news stories from your neck of the woods. And until next time, don't get captured.
Follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and at CINIKRADIO.com. Available for download on iTunes.
I'm just waiting for Meanwhile at the Legion of Doom.